In 1995, inside a silent tour bus, Shannon Hoon was found dead at 27, just 3 years after No Rain flooded MTV worldwide, sold over 5 million copies, and turned him into the smiling face inside the costume. Behind that smile were heroin, cocaine, and a body pushed back on the road while he had just become a father. Did fame lift him to the top, or did it kill him faster than anything else ever could? At the peak of the 1990s alternative explosion, Shannon Hoon was living a contradiction the cameras never caught. While MTV replayed No Rain on a loop and crowds sang along to a song they thought was cheerful, Hoon was slipping deeper into addiction, often using before shows, after shows, and sometimes during tours without stopping. The world saw a carefree symbol of joy. The band saw a man who barely slept, barely ate, and quietly unraveled under the weight of instant fame. How long can someone survive when the image they sell is the opposite of who they are? The pressure intensified when Blind Melon released their second album, Soup, darker, heavier, brutally honest. Critics praised its depth, but radio turned away, and the label panicked. Tour dates multiplied. Rest disappeared. Hoon's drug use escalated as the music grew more personal, as if every lyric tore another layer off his skin in public. Even when he checked into rehab, the industry clock kept ticking, deadlines, contracts, expectations. Because slowing down meant disappearing, and disappearing felt like another kind of death, didn't it? Then came the cruelest irony. In 1995, Shannon became a father. For a moment, he talked about quitting drugs, about starting over, about choosing life. But instead of stopping the tour, the machine pushed forward. Nights blurred into needles, buses, and hotel rooms, until hope and exhaustion collided on a quiet October morning. If love, success, and a second chance weren't enough to save him, what chance did he ever really have? Before the world ever knew the smiling man in the costume, Shannon Hoon was a quiet, sensitive kid growing up in Indiana, far from stages, cameras, and applause. He wasn't raised in chaos or poverty. His childhood looked stable from the outside, and that, in many ways, made his inner storms harder to explain. Shannon felt things deeply, too deeply, and from an early age he sensed that the world expected him to be tougher, simpler, less emotional than he actually was. How do you survive childhood when you already feel like you don't quite fit inside your own skin? Music became his first refuge. While other kids looked outward for validation, Shannon turned inward, absorbing voices that sounded like truth rather than entertainment. Bob Dylan, Van Morrison, Janis Joplin. These weren't just artists to him. They were proof that vulnerability could be powerful, that pain could be shaped into something meaningful. He learned early that songs didn't need to be pretty to be honest, and honesty mattered more than anything else. But that same honesty also made him fragile. If music opened a door to expression, it also opened a door to feeling everything. Every doubt, every sadness, every longing without protection. How long can a young mind carry that kind of emotional weight? Friends described Shannon as introspective and gentle, but also restless. He had a natural charisma, yet he distrusted attention. Compliments made him uncomfortable. Expectations made him anxious. Even before fame, he feared being misunderstood, afraid that people would hear his voice without hearing his meaning. That fear followed him everywhere, shaping his personality long before it shaped his career. He wasn't chasing stardom. He was chasing relief. And when relief didn't come easily, he learned to self-soothe in other ways, experimenting with substances that dulled the sharp edges of his thoughts. Was this already the beginning of a pattern he wouldn't be able to break? As a teenager, Shannon gravitated toward outsiders. The kids who didn't belong to a single group, the ones who questioned authority and searched for something real. He wrote lyrics constantly, not to impress anyone, but to survive his own mind. Writing was how he organized chaos, how he turned confusion into structure. Yet even then, a contradiction emerged. The more clearly he expressed himself, the more invisible he felt. People enjoyed the sound of his voice, but few asked what he was trying to say. What happens when a person learns that being heard doesn't always mean being understood? By the time Shannon left Indiana for a larger world, he carried both a gift and a curse. The gift was empathy, the ability to feel others' emotions and translate them into music. The curse was permeability, no emotional boundaries, no off switch. Every disappointment lingered, Every rejection cut deep. Every success raised the stakes higher. He wasn't building armor. He was sharpening sensitivity in an industry that rewards endurance. He was unknowingly training himself to feel everything more intensely than most people ever would. Could someone like that ever survive fame intact? This foundation mattered. It explains why success would later feel suffocating instead of freeing, why applause would amplify his insecurities rather than silence them. Shannon Hoon didn't fall apart because he was weak. He fell apart because he was too open in a world that would eventually demand a mask. Long before Blind Melon existed, the seeds of his brilliance and his tragedy were already planted. The only question was when the pressure would become too much. When Shannon Hoon left Indiana and headed west, he wasn't chasing a record deal or a spotlight. Los Angeles, for him, wasn't a promise of fame. It was a test, a place where thousands of voices competed to be heard, where authenticity was both currency and liability. Shannon arrived with little more than his voice, his lyrics, and an unshakable belief that music had to mean something or it meant nothing at all. But how do you protect meaning in a city built on selling images? In L.A., he drifted through scenes without fully belonging to any of them. He wasn't grunge enough for the Seattle imitators, too raw for polished pop, too melodic to be comfortably underground. While others were copying what sold, Shannon was writing songs that felt older than trends, songs that sounded like confessionals rather than singles. His voice carried warmth and sadness at the same time, a tone that felt familiar yet unsettled, like a memory you couldn't quite place. It drew people in, but it didn't fit neatly into the industry's boxes. And in the early 90s, not fitting a box could kill a career before it began, couldn't it? Blind Melon formed almost accidentally, through shared instincts more than shared ambition. The band wasn't built around chasing radio play. It was built around feel. Rehearsals weren't about perfection, but connection. Shannon didn't perform at the band. He blended into it, letting the music breathe instead of forcing it forward. This wasn't from an ego. It was vulnerability on display. On stage, he sang like someone trying to understand himself in real time, every note slightly exposed. That intimacy became Blind Melon's signature, but it also made Shannon emotionally naked in a business that thrives on distance. How long can someone stay open before the world starts taking pieces? Early shows earned a small but devoted following. People didn't just watch Blind Melon, they felt them. Shannon's lyrics spoke about isolation, longing, and quiet despair without theatrics. There was no rage for effect, no shock tactics, just honesty. That honesty caught the attention of record executives who heard potential without fully understanding its cost. When Blind Melon signed their deal, it felt less like a victory and more like a gamble. Could something this sincere survive commercial pressure without being hollowed out? The first cracks appeared almost immediately. Labels wanted a sound they could sell, a song they could repeat, an image they could package. Shannon resisted anything that felt dishonest, but compromise crept in slowly, disguised as opportunity. Studio sessions stretched longer. Expectations grew louder. Suddenly, the songs that once felt private were being evaluated, trimmed, and reframed. Shannon tried to stay grounded, but each adjustment felt like a small betrayal of why he started writing in the first place. Was success already asking him to become someone else? No Rain emerged during this period, not as a calculated hit, but as a song born from emotional fatigue. Ironically, it was lighter than much of what Shannon was writing, more accessible, less confrontational. When paired with a playful visual identity, it became the band's entry point into the mainstream. But even before it exploded, Shannon sensed a danger. He worried that people would hear the melody and miss the message, see the smile and ignore the sadness underneath. Could a song meant to express disconnection end up disguising it instead? As Blind Melon's momentum grew, Shannon's internal conflict intensified. He loved music but distrusted the machinery around it. He wanted listeners, but not at the cost of being misread. He wanted freedom, yet every step forward tightened the structure around him. To cope, he leaned harder into substances that softened anxiety and quieted doubt. At first casually, then habitually, the path to his own sound was becoming inseparable from the path to self-escape. And when escape becomes routine, does it stop being a choice? Despite the pressure, Shannon kept writing deeper, darker material. He wasn't interested in repeating himself. even if repetition meant safety. This insistence on growth set him apart artistically, but isolated him emotionally. The industry rewards consistency. Shannon chased truth. Each new song pulled further away from the image forming around him, widening the gap between who he was and who the world thought he was. That gap would soon become unbearable. By the time Blind Melon stood on the edge of widespread recognition, Shannon Hoon had already traveled far from the simplicity he once sought. He had found his sound, but it came wrapped in expectations, compromises, and invisible chains. The question was no longer whether his music would be heard, but whether he would survive being heard at all. When your voice finally reaches the world, what happens if the world only listens to the parts it wants to hear? When Blind Melon finally broke through, it didn't happen gradually. It exploded. In the early 1990s, alternative music was swallowing the mainstream, and suddenly Shannon Hoon was everywhere. MTV rotation turned No Rain into an unavoidable presence, playing day and night, week after week, until the song stopped being just a track and became a cultural mood. Album sales surged past 5 million copies. Tours sold out, and Blind Melon went from struggling outsiders to one of the most recognizable bands of the decade. From the outside, it looked like the dream every young musician was chasing. But whose dream was it really? The image crystallized around a single visual. Shannon in costume, smiling, playful, approachable. It was innocent, charming, and unforgettable. For millions of viewers, that was who he was, a symbol of lightness in a grunge era defined by angst. But inside, Shannon felt increasingly detached from the version of himself being broadcast to the world. The song that made them famous was about isolation and emotional disconnection, yet it was received as cheerful and carefree. Every cheer felt slightly off, every laugh slightly misaligned. How do you explain that your biggest success is also your deepest misunderstanding? As the band's profile grew, so did the demands. Interviews, appearances, non-stop touring. There was no pause button. The industry wanted momentum, and momentum meant repetition. Play the hit, smile for the camera, stay accessible. Shannon complied outwardly, but inwardly he felt himself shrinking. He didn't hate the audience. He hated the simplification. He was an artist who believed music should evolve, yet the machine rewarded familiarity. The more Blind Melon succeeded, the less room there was for ambiguity, experimentation, or silence. And silence was the one thing Shannon needed most. Fame also magnified his vulnerabilities. Where he once turned to substances to manage anxiety, now they became tools for endurance. Drugs helped him get through long days, long nights, long stretches of being on. They dulled the edges of discomfort and quieted the voice that questioned everything. At first, it felt manageable, functional, even, but the line between coping and dependence blurred quickly. When the stage lights went out and the applause faded, what was left to hold him together? Blind Melon tried to move forward artistically, refusing to become a one-song band. Their second album, Soup, reflected Shannon's internal state. Darker, heavier, more introspective. The lyrics cut closer to the bone, dealing with confusion, pressure, and emotional decay. Critics recognized its depth, calling it brave and uncompromising. But the market was less forgiving. Radio wanted another No Rain. MTV wanted another smile. The disconnect between artistic growth and commercial expectation widened into a chasm. Was this what success demanded? Self-betrayal in exchange for survival? On tour, the strain became visible. Performances varied wildly depending on Shannon's condition. Some nights he was transcendent, channeling raw emotion into unforgettable moments. Other nights he struggled to stay present, fighting exhaustion and addiction in front of thousands of people. Bandmates worried, management worried, but the tour kept going. Contracts didn't care about mental health, and schedules didn't pause for recovery. In the logic of the industry, stopping meant failure, and failure was worse than burnout. Or was it? The contradiction at the heart of Shannon's fame grew sharper. He was loved by millions, yet increasingly alone. People recognized him everywhere, but few truly saw him. Interviews focused on the costume, the hit song, the vibe, rarely the inner turmoil driving his work. Each question he answered felt like a missed opportunity to be understood. Over time, that sense of being unheard became heavier than criticism ever could. What happens when the whole world is listening, but no one is actually hearing you. And still, the glory continued. Bigger stages, louder crowds, more visibility. On paper, Blind Melon had achieved what most bands never would. But inside, the success was rotting. Shannon began to feel trapped by the very thing he'd never actively sought. Fame didn't give him freedom. It narrowed his options. Walking away felt impossible. Staying felt deadly. Between those two choices, he drifted, hoping something or someone would intervene. By the mid-1990s, Blind Melon stood at the height of recognition and the edge of collapse. The spotlight was brighter than ever, but it cast longer shadows. Shannon Hoon had reached the summit, only to discover that the air up there was thin and unforgiving. When the world finally gives you everything it promised, what do you do if it still isn't enough to save you? By the time the applause became routine, the damage was already done. Shannon Hoon didn't collapse suddenly. He eroded. Fame didn't break him in one dramatic moment. It wore him down quietly, day after day, until the version of himself that once believed in music as salvation barely existed anymore. The schedule never slowed, the expectations never softened, and the drugs that once felt like relief became the only way to function. When survival itself depends on numbing your mind, how do you know when you've crossed the point of no return? Heroin and cocaine stopped being indulgences and turned into rituals. They weren't about getting high. They were about getting through interviews that felt hollow, through stages that demanded energy he no longer had, through the growing fear that his best work was being ignored because it didn't fit the image people had already chosen for him. Shannon was rebelling against success. He was suffocating inside it, and every time he tried to pull back, the machine pulled harder. Tours were booked. Commitments were locked. Momentum became a prison disguised as progress. How do you ask for help when the entire system is built to keep you moving? The second album, Soup, should have been a turning point. Artistically, it was deeper, more honest, and closer to who Shannon truly was than anything he'd released before. The lyrics were raw, uneasy, and intentionally uncomfortable. Songs that refused to smile on command. Critics noticed. Musicians noticed. But the mainstream audience didn't follow, and radio largely turned away. To the label, this wasn't growth. It was a problem. To Shannon, it felt like proof that telling the truth had consequences. If honesty costs you love, do you learn a lie, or do you disappear? The pressure bled into the band dynamic. Blind Melon wasn't just fighting the industry. They were fighting fear. Fear of losing momentum. Fear of losing relevance. Fear of losing Shannon himself. Conversations about slowing down were always postponed. Rehab attempts were treated like temporary detours rather than necessary stops. There was always another show, another city, another obligation waiting on the other side of recovery. And Shannon, exhausted and vulnerable, kept saying yes. Not because he wanted to, but because stopping felt like falling. Isn't it easier to keep running than to face the silence? On stage, the cracks became harder to hide. Some nights Shannon delivered performances that felt almost spiritual, voice trembling, eyes distant, lyrics cutting deeper than ever. Other nights, he struggled to hold himself together, physically and mentally. Audiences didn't always understand what they were witnessing. Some thought it was rock and roll chaos. Others thought it was arrogance. Few recognized it as a man unraveling in real time. When pain becomes entertainment, who is responsible for stopping the show? Behind the scenes, Shannon's mental health deteriorated. Depression settled in, heavy and persistent. He spoke privately about feeling lost, about questioning whether music still belonged to him, or whether it had been taken over by expectations. The joy that once fueled his creativity was gone, replaced by obligation and dread. Drugs filled the gap, but they also widened it, pulling him further away from clarity. Each attempt to regain control ended in relapse, reinforcing the belief that escape was permanent and recovery was temporary. How do you rebuild hope after failing yourself over and over again? The most devastating part wasn't that Shannon was struggling. It was that he knew he was. He was painfully self-aware, able to articulate his decline, but unable to stop it. That awareness became its own form of torture. He could see the cliff ahead and still felt powerless to turn around. Friends worried. Bandmates worried. Yet the momentum of fame kept rolling forward, indifferent to the human cost. Success had become something that happened to him, not for him. By late 1994, the contradiction at the heart of his life was unbearable. Shannon Hoon was admired, celebrated, and recognized everywhere he went. Yet he felt more invisible than ever. The world wanted the smile, the song, the symbol. It didn't want the pain that made them possible. And trapped between who he was and who he was expected to be, Shannon continued to fall inward, quietly, dangerously. When you know exactly what's destroying you, but feel powerless to stop it, what choices are you really left with? In early 1995, something shifted quietly, almost invisibly. Shannon, whom became a father. For the first time in years, the future wasn't abstract. It had a face, a weight, a reason. Friends noticed a change, moment of clarity, talk of getting clean, talk of slowing down. Shannon spoke about responsibility with a seriousness that hadn't been there before, as if the idea of staying alive had finally found an anchor. For a brief window, hope felt tangible. But how fragile is hope when it arrives late, after so much damage has already been done? He entered rehab again, determined this time to make it stick. The intention was real. The desire was real. But recovery requires time, and time was the one thing he wasn't given. The industry didn't pause for rebirth. Tours were already booked. Financial pressure loomed. Expectations didn't soften because someone found a reason to live. Instead of rest, Shannon was pushed back into motion, back onto buses, back into hotel rooms, back into the same environments that had nearly destroyed him before. Can healing survive when the wounds are reopened every night? The contradiction became brutal. By day, Shannon talked about fatherhood and starting over. By night, he was surrounded by temptation, exhaustion, and the familiar loneliness of life on the road. Drugs were never far away, and the old patterns waited patiently. Relapse wasn't dramatic. It was incremental. A slip here, a rationalization there. Each step backward carried more shame than the last, because now he knew what he was risking. Knowing better didn't make it easier. It made the failure heavier. How do you forgive yourself when you're hurting the very thing that saved you? Blind Melon's tour continued through the fall, and those closest to Shannon sensed the danger. His body was weaker. His mood swung harder. Moments of lucidity were followed by crashes that felt deeper than before. He wasn't chasing oblivion anymore. He was trying to survive it. On stage, he still found flashes of transcendence, brief reminders of who he once was. But offstage, the exhaustion always won. The balance between life and collapse narrowed until there was almost no space left to stand. On October 21st, 1995, the road finally stopped. Shannon was found dead on the band's tour bus in New Orleans, the result of a drug overdose. 27 years old, another name added to a list no one ever wants to join. The news landed with a dull, sickening finality. There was no dramatic goodbye, no last performance etched into memory, just silence. A man who had given so much of himself to the world disappeared quietly, far from the cheers that once followed him everywhere. Is there anything crueler than a life that ends just as someone learns how badly they want to live? The aftermath was immediate and devastating. Blind Melon canceled the rest of the tour. The band fractured under the weight of grief and unanswered questions. Fans struggled to reconcile the smiling image they loved with the reality they'd never been shown. Media narratives rushed in, flattening complexity into cautionary headlines. Addiction, fame, another fallen star. But those labels missed the truth. Shannon didn't die because he was reckless or ungrateful. He died because he was human in a system that demanded endurance over care. In the weeks that followed, those who knew him spoke about his gentleness, his empathy, his relentless honesty. They remembered a man who felt too much and refused to turn that sensitivity off, even when it hurt. The irony was impossible to ignore. The same openness that made his music resonate with the openness that left him defenseless. He didn't build walls. He built songs. And when the songs weren't enough to protect him, there was nothing left between him and the fall. Shannon Hoon's collapse wasn't a single mistake. It was a series of pressures converging at the worst possible moment. Fatherhood offered a reason to stay, but the machinery of fame offered no room to recover. Between those two forces, he was crushed. His death was inevitable, but it was enabled by schedules, by silence, by a culture that celebrates output more than survival. When someone finally chooses life, what does it say about us if the world doesn't let them have it? For a brief moment, it seemed like the story might change direction. After years of drifting between survival and self-destruction, Shannon Hoon began talking, not about tours or charts, but about stopping, slowing down, reclaiming something that fame had taken from him. Fatherhood didn't magically cure his addiction, but it reframed it. For the first time, the cost of continuing wasn't abstract. It was personal. He wasn't just risking his own life anymore. He was risking becoming a ghost in his daughter's future. And that realization hit harder than any headline ever could. Those close to him noticed the shift. Shannon spoke with clarity that hadn't surfaced in years. He admitted fear of dying young, of being remembered only as a cautionary tale, of never getting a chance to be fully present for someone who needed him. He talked about making music differently, about stepping away from the pace that had nearly destroyed him. There was no grand declaration, no public redemption arc, just quiet resolve, the kind that forms when someone has already lost too much to keep pretending everything is fine. But resolve needs space to grow. Was there any space left for him? Rehab was meant to be the reset, not a PR move, not a checkbox, but a genuine attempt to regain control. For a while, it worked. Shannon reconnected with the parts of himself that existed before the pressure, the curiosity, the sensitivity, the love of sound without spectacle. He wrote again, not for deadlines, but for relief. In those moments, he sounded lighter, steadier, almost hopeful. The possibility of a future beyond the cycle flickered into view. Yet even as he was rebuilding, the clock of the industry kept ticking. Tours were waiting. Contracts were binding. The past wasn't done with him yet. The return to road was framed as manageable, a compromise. Shorter stints, better boundaries, support systems in place. On paper, it made sense. In reality, it placed Shannon back into the exact conditions that had triggered his collapse. Isolation, exhaustion, and constant exposure to temptation. Recovery is fragile, especially when it's new. Every late night, every hotel room, every stretch of highway reopened old neural paths. The discipline required to stay clean clashed with the chaos of touring. How do you protect a healing mind when the environment never changes? Still, Shannon tried. He talked openly with bandmates about limits. He expressed a desire to evolve Blind Melon's sound, to move away from the expectations that had boxed him in. He wanted honesty without spectacle, connection without performance. In quieter moments, he imagined a life where music wasn't a battlefield, where it could exist alongside family instead of competing with it. These weren't fantasies, they were plans. But plans require time, and time was slipping. The pressure wasn't just internal. Externally, Blind Melon stood at a crossroads. The industry wanted clarity. Were they the band from No Rain, or were they something riskier? Labels rarely reward ambiguity. Shannon's push for authenticity conflicted with commercial caution, and compromise felt like erosion. Each concession chipped away at the fragile sense of self he was trying to rebuild. The attempt at rebirth demanded consistency, but consistency was impossible in a life built around constant disruption. How many fresh starts can one person survive? As weeks passed, the strain resurfaced, not as chaos, but as fatigue, the kind that seeps in when effort outweighs reward. Shannon wasn't spiraling dramatically. He was wearing down again quietly. The difference this time was awareness. He knew what was happening. He could feel the old patterns circling back. That knowledge didn't empower him. It exhausted him. Fighting yourself every day is its own kind of addiction. At what point does resilience become another burden? There were moments, small human moments, that hinted at what might have been. Phone calls home. Conversations about ordinary things. Laughter that didn't feel forced. Those fragments mattered. They showed that rebirth wasn't fantasy. It was possible, but possibility doesn't guarantee survival. The margin for error was thin, and the system around him left little room for missteps. Recovery demanded patience, while the road demanded endurance. One nourishes life, the other consumes it. By the fall of 1995, Shannon stood in a dangerous in-between space. Not fully lost, not fully saved. He had glimpsed another way to live, but he was still tethered to the life that had nearly killed him. The attempt at rebirth was real, sincere, and unfinished. It wasn't failure that ended it. It was interruption. A world that never stopped moving didn't wait for him to catch up. In the end, Shannon Hoon didn't lose because he lacked strength. He lost because starting over requires more than intention. It requires permission. Permission to slow down. Permission to be human. Permission to choose life without penalty. If rebirth is possible, why do we make it so hard for people to complete it? After Shannon Hoon was gone, the noise faded faster than anyone expected. Tours stopped. Interviews vanished. Blind Melon, a band once propelled by momentum, fell into a stunned silence. There was no roadmap for grief at that scale. No guide for what comes after losing the person who gave the music its pulse. Bandmates struggled not only with loss, but with guilt. Questions about what could have been done differently, whether stopping sooner might have changed the outcome. When a system keeps moving until someone breaks, who carries responsibility once the break is final? Public reaction followed a familiar pattern. Headlines condensed a complex life into a cautionary tale. Addiction, fame, another artist who couldn't handle success. It was simple, digestible, and incomplete. What was rarely discussed was the cost of misunderstanding. How Shannon had been celebrated for an image that contradicted his inner reality, and how that contradiction had been monetized. Fans mourned the smiling singer they thought they knew, only gradually discovering the depth of the pain beneath the surface. Is it grief if you never truly knew the person you're grieving? In the years that followed, Blind Melon's second album, Soup, began to find its audience, free from commercial expectations. Listeners returned to it with fresh ears and new context. The darkness that once felt uncomfortable now felt prophetic. Lyrics that had been overlooked were re-examined as confessions, warnings, and cries for understanding. What failed on the charts succeeded in time. The album grew into a cult classic, a document of an artist telling the truth before the world was ready to hear it. How often do we recognize honesty only after it's too late to save the person who offered it? Shannon's legacy also shifted in quieter ways. Musicians cited him as an influence, not for his fame, but for his vulnerability. He became a symbol of artistic sincerity in an era increasingly defined by branding and control. His story resonated with those who felt out of place in the machinery of success, who struggled with the pressure to perform happiness while privately unraveling. He wasn't remembered as a rebel or a martyr, but as someone who felt deeply and paid the price for refusing to numb that sensitivity entirely. Is there bravery in feeling too much, even when it hurts? For his family, the legacy was more intimate and more painful. A daughter who would grow up knowing her father through songs, stories, and absence. A life measured not only by what was lost, but by what was never allowed to fully form. In that context, legacy isn't about albums sold or cultural impact. It's about the quiet spaces left behind, the empty chair, the unanswered questions, the future that never arrived. Can art ever compensate for a presence that's gone? Today, Shannon Hoon occupies a different place in music history than he did in life. No longer reduced to a single hit or a cheerful costume, he's remembered as a reminder of what happens when sensitivity meets an unforgiving system. His story challenges the idea that success equals survival and forces a harder conversation about how artists are supported or abandoned once they're profitable. He didn't disappear because he lacked talent or opportunity. He disappeared because the cost of staying visible became greater than the cost of vanishing. In the end, Shannon's legacy isn't defined by how he died, but by what his life exposes. That authenticity is fragile. That timing matters. That understanding can arrive too late. And that behind every image we consume, there's a human being absorbing the impact. If we honor artists only after they're gone, what does that say about how we listen while they're still here? In the end, Shannon, who wasn't destroyed by excess alone or by weakness, or even by addiction in the way headlines prefer to simplify. He was undone by a collision between a soul built for feeling and a world that rewards endurance over care. His smile became a symbol, his pain became background noise, and his humanity was slowly edited out of the picture. What the audience consumed was an image. What the man lived was a struggle no one could monetize properly. Shannon didn't want immortality. He didn't want myth. He wanted honesty without punishment, success without self-erasure, music without having to bleed in public every night. He wanted time to grow, to heal, to become more than a moment that made him famous. But time is rarely granted to those who peak too fast, and grace is scarce in systems designed to keep moving forward at any cost. His story forces an uncomfortable reflection, not about drugs, not about fame, but about listening, about what we reward, what we ignore, and what we demand from people we claim to admire. Shannon Hoon didn't fail at fame. Fame failed to protect him when he finally needed protection most. And maybe the darkest truth of all is this: we didn't lose him because he had nothing to live for. We lost him because the world didn't slow down when he finally chose to live. If we keep celebrating artists only after they're gone, are we honoring their work or avoiding our responsibility to hear them while they're still asking for help?